This is Chapter 23 of The Boy's Life of Mark Twain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Boy's Life of Mark Twain by Albert Bigelow Paine. Chapter 23, Artemus Ward and Literary San Francisco. It was about the end of 1863 that a new literary impulse came into Mark Twain's life. The gentle and lovable humorist Artemus Ward, Charles F. Brown, was that year lecturing in the West, and came to Virginia City. Ward had intended to stay only a few days, but the whirl of the Comstock fascinated him. He made the Enterprise office his headquarters, and remained 3 weeks. He and Mark Twain became boon companions. Their humor was not unlike. They were kindred spirits, together almost constantly. Ward was then at the summit of his fame, and gave the younger man the highest encouragement, prophesying great things for his work. Clemens, on his side, was stirred, perhaps for the first time, with a real literary ambition, and the thought that he, too, might win a place of honor. He promised Ward that he would send work to the Eastern papers. On Christmas Eve, Ward gave a dinner to the Enterprise staff at Chaumont's, a fine French restaurant of that day. When refreshments came, Artemus lifted his glass and said, "I give you Upper Canada." The company rose and drank the toast in serious silence. Then Mr. Goodman said, "Of course, Artemus, it's all right, but why did you give us Upper Canada?" "Because I don't want it myself," said Ward gravely. What would one not give to have listened to the talk of that evening? Mark Twain's power had awakened. Artemus Ward was in his prime. They were giants of a race that became extinct when Mark Twain died. Goodman remained rather quiet during the evening. Ward had appointed him to order the dinner, and he had attended to this duty without mingling much in the conversation. When Ward asked him why he did not join the banter, he said, "I am preparing a joke, Artemus, but I am keeping it for the present." At a late hour Ward finally called for the bill. It was $237. "What!" exclaimed Artemus. "That's my joke," said Goodman. "But I was only exclaiming because it was not twice as much," laughed Ward, laying the money on the table. Ward remained through the holidays, and later wrote back an affectionate letter to Mark Twain. "I shall always remember Virginia as a bright spot in my existence," he said, "as all others must, or rather cannot be, as it were." With Artemus Ward's encouragement, Mark Twain now began sending work eastward. The New York Sunday Mercury published one, possibly more, of his sketches, but they were not in his best vein, and made little impression. He may have been too busy for outside work, for the legislative session of 1864 was just beginning. Furthermore, he had been chosen governor of the Third House, a mock legislature organized for one session, to be held as a church benefit. The governor was to deliver a message, which meant that he was to burlesque from the platform all public officials and personages, from the real governor down. With the exception of a short talk he had once given at a printers' dinner in Keokuk, it was Mark Twain's first appearance as a speaker, and the beginning of a lifelong series of triumphs on the platform. The building was packed, the aisles full, the audience was ready for fun, and he gave it to them. Nobody escaped ridicule. From the beginning to end the house was a storm of laughter and applause. Not a word of this first address of Mark Twain's has been preserved, but those who heard it always spoke of it as the greatest effort of his life, as to them it seemed, no doubt. For his third House address, Clemens was presented with a gold watch inscribed, "To Governor Mark Twain." Everywhere now he was pointed out as a distinguished figure, and his quaint remarks were quoted. Few of these sayings are remembered today, though occasionally one is still unforgotten. At a party one night, being urged to make a conundrum, he said, "Well, why am I like the Pacific Ocean?" Several guesses were made, but he shook his head. Someone said, "We give it up. Tell us, Mark, why are you like the Pacific Ocean?" "I don't know," he drawled. "I was just asking for information. The governor of Nevada was generally absent, and Orion Clemens was executive head of the territory. His wife, who had joined him in Carson City, was social head of the little capital, and Brother Sam, with his new distinction and now once more something of a dandy in dress, was society's chief ornament, a great change, certainly, from the early months of his arrival less than 3 years before. It was near the end of May, 1864, when Mark Twain left Nevada for San Francisco. The immediate cause of his going was a duel elaborately arranged between Mark Twain and the editor of a rival paper, but never fought. In fact, it was mainly a burlesque affair throughout, chiefly concocted by that inveterate joker, Steve Gillis, already mentioned in connection with the pipe incident. The new dueling law, however, did not distinguish between real and mock affrays, and the prospect of being served with a summons made a good excuse for Clemens and Gillis to go to San Francisco, which had long attracted them. They were great friends, these two, and presently were living together and working on the same paper, the Morning Call, Clemens as a reporter and Gillis as a compositor. Gillis, with his tendency to mischief, was a constant exasperation to his roommate, who, goaded by some new torture, would sometimes denounce him in feverish terms. Yet they were never anything but the closest of friends. Mark Twain did not find happiness in his new position on the Call. There was less freedom and more drudgery than he had known on the Enterprise. His day was spent around the police court, attending fires, weddings, and funerals, with brief glimpses of the theaters at night. Once he wrote, "It was fearful drudgery, soulless drudgery, and almost destitute of interest. It was an awful slavery for a lazy man." It must have been so. There was little chance for original work. He had become just a part of a news machine. He saw many public abuses that he wished to expose, but the policy of the paper opposed him. Once, however, he found a policeman asleep on his beat. Going to a nearby vegetable stall, he borrowed a large cabbage leaf, came back, and stood over the sleeper, gently fanning him. He knew the paper would not publish the policeman's negligence, but he could advertise it in his own way. A large crowd soon collected, much amused. When he thought the audience large enough, he went away. Next day the joke was all over the city. He grew indifferent to the call work, and when an assistant was allowed him to do part of the running for items, it was clear to everybody that presently the assistant would be able to do it all. But there was a pleasant and profitable side to the San Francisco life. There were real literary people there, among them a young man with rooms upstairs in the Call office, Francis Bret Harte, editor of the Californian, a new literary weekly which Charles Henry Webb had recently founded. Bret Harte was not yet famous, but his gifts were recognized on the Pacific Slope, especially by the Era group of writers, the Golden Era being a literary monthly of considerable distinction. Joachim Miller recalls, from his diary of that period, having seen Prentice Mulford, Bret Harte, Charles Warren Stoddart, Mark Twain, Artemus Ward, and others, all assembled there at one time, a remarkable group certainly, to be dropped down behind the Sierras so long ago. They were a hopeful, happy lot, and sometimes received $5 for an article, which of course seemed a good deal more precious than a much larger sum earned in another way. Mark Twain had contributed to the Era while still in Virginia City, and now with Bret Harte was ranked as a leader of the group. The two were much together, and when Harte became editor of the Californian he engaged Clemens as a regular contributor at the very fancy rate of $12 an article. Some of the brief chapters included today in Sketches New and Old were done at that time. They have humor, but are not equal to his later work, and beyond the Pacific Slope they seem to have attracted little attention. In Roughing It, the author tells us how he finally was dismissed from the Call for general incompetency, and presently found himself in the depths of hard luck, debt, and poverty. But this is only his old habit of making a story on himself sound as uncomplimentary as possible. The true version is that the Call publisher and Mark Twain had a friendly talk and decided that it was better for both to break off the connection. Almost immediately he arranged